When did you finally stop letting your family walk all over you? They thought I'd stay quiet forever. Smile, nod, take it like always. But the moment I stopped playing along, everything they'd tried to keep buried started crawling into the light. My family always had a specific rhythm. Not a harmony, more like a carefully rehearsed routine. My mother was the conductor, my father the silent bassist, and the rest of us, me, my brother, and my sister, were just expected to keep in time. Don't question, don't interrupt, don't make waves. I learned early that my job was to absorb the tension so the others could keep pretending nothing was wrong. I used to think that was love, staying quiet so no one else had to carry the weight. It wasn't one big thing that made me stop. It was thousands of tiny ones. I remember being 10 and taking the blame when my brother smashed Dad's watch. I remember my mom calling me ungrateful when I asked if we could eat dinner at the table like other families. I remember birthdays where I pretended to be grateful for a half-hearted gift while watching my siblings get everything they asked for. And I remember the silence, the thick, suffocating silence that followed any attempt at honesty. The house we lived in wasn't big, but it felt cavernous. Cold, like all the warmth had been locked away somewhere I didn't have access to. We had a living room no one really lived in, a dining table that was more decorative than functional, and a basement my father disappeared into when things got tense upstairs. My mother hated that basement. Said it smelled like old lies. That was one of the rare moments she let something slip. When I was 13, I started writing things down. Not in a journal exactly, just on scraps of paper. Observations, details, like the fact that Mom always turned up the TV when the phone rang late at night. Or that my sister, Danielle, would flinch when Dad raised his voice, even when it wasn't at her. Or that my brother, Caleb, suddenly had nicer clothes than me. Despite no one saying anything about his after-school job, I kept those notes hidden in the lining of an old shoe under my bed. It made me feel like I wasn't crazy. Like someone else would read them one day and understand. It wasn't until I turned 23 and moved out that I started seeing the full picture. I wasn't supposed to leave. They never said that out loud, but it was implied. The kind of implication that seeps into your bones and makes you question your own intentions. When I told them I'd signed a lease with a friend across town, my mother got quiet. Why would you waste your money like that? She said, you could be saving for a future. But I didn't want her version of the future. That first year out was hard. Financially, emotionally, all of it. But it was the first time I could hear myself think. I didn't realize how much noise my family made until I got away from it. I'd visit now and then, birthdays, holidays, the occasional guilt trip dinner. But something had shifted in me. And they felt it. My mom would make little comments. You look tired, sweetie. Are you eating well over there? Or it must be lonely living with just a roommate. My dad would just nod, occasionally asking if I needed anything, but never really looking me in the eye. Danielle barely spoke, and Caleb had started driving a car I knew he couldn't afford legally. One day, 2 years after I moved out, I got a call from my sister. She never called, texted sometimes, but never called. She was crying, panicked. Said Mom had collapsed in the kitchen and no one could get a hold of Dad. I drove over in under 10 minutes. But by the time I got there, the ambulance had already left. At the hospital, everything moved slow and sharp. White lights, the smell of antiseptic, nurses who spoke in code. I asked what happened, and no one really answered. My sister looked scared, and Caleb was pacing. Then I overheard one of the nurses say it had been a reaction. I didn't know to what. Eventually, a doctor came out and told us Mom had ingested a combination of sleeping pills and alcohol. It wasn't enough to kill her, but enough to raise alarms. I looked at Danielle. She looked at me. No one said anything. Mom stayed overnight. They released her the next afternoon, with a warning and a pamphlet on mental health. On the drive home, she was quiet. Then she said, you should have been here. I didn't answer. But something in me started to shift again. A few weeks later, Danielle showed up at my apartment. She looked thinner, pale. She asked if she could stay a few nights. I didn't ask why. I didn't need to. That night, she left her phone on the coffee table while she showered, and it buzzed. I wasn't trying to snoop. But the screen lit up with a name I didn't recognize. A man's name. And the message just said, we had a deal. You don't talk, you get paid. Don't make me come to the house. My stomach dropped. I didn't say anything to her that night. But I took a photo of the message. Just in case. The next morning, I asked her who he was. She denied knowing him. Said it was spam. When I pushed, she got angry. Defensive. You're just like Mom, she said. Always looking for something wrong. But I wasn't. I was trying to find something true. That week, I started revisiting those notes I'd kept in the old shoe. I'd scanned them years ago, just in case. There were things I hadn't thought about in ages. Like the neighbor who moved away suddenly. The time Mom burned a bunch of old papers in the backyard and told us not to ask questions. The weird metal box in the basement Dad never let us touch. And that one night, I'd almost forgotten. where Danielle ran out of the house barefoot, crying, and came back the next morning with a busted lip she blamed on tripping. I started digging. It wasn't about revenge. It was about sanity. About knowing if I'd imagined the rot, or if it had been real all along. I started with public records. Not dramatic, just small things. Property history, incident reports in our neighborhood, anything that might align with the memories scratching at the edges of my mind. I found out our house had once belonged to another family, surname Kessler. Sold under duress in 1991. That didn't mean much at first, until I realized the Kesslers were the ones who lived next door when I was a kid. I remembered their son, Tommy. He was older than me, but we played sometimes. Then one day they were gone. I was too young to understand eviction or hush money. But now I wondered if they left, or if they were pushed out. And by whom? Around the same time, I noticed something strange in my father's routine. He had always been a quiet man, but now he was careful. He stopped taking calls in the house. He'd go out to his truck, even in the rain, and stay in there for 20-30 minutes. Danielle was still living with me by then, and I asked her if she noticed. She shrugged it off, but her eyes darted away when she answered. She knew something. I checked the crawl space in their house when I visited a few days later. I told Mom I needed to grab an old box of books. She let me go down alone. There was dust everywhere, and most of the shelves were empty. But tucked behind a stack of paint cans was a taped-up shoebox. Inside, old Polaroids, worn receipts, a few clippings from newspapers. And one photo that made me sit down hard on the floor. It was a picture of my sister, maybe 12 years old, standing in the hallway in her pajamas. And behind her, barely in frame, was a man. Not my father, not my brother, a man I didn't recognize. His face was partially turned, blurred by motion, but something in his posture made my skin crawl. Why would anyone take that picture? I didn't take the photo. I didn't touch anything. I resealed the box and put it right back where I found it. But I snapped my own picture of it before leaving. That night I didn't sleep. A few days later, Danielle disappeared. I came home and her things were gone. Her phone number stopped working. I called my mom, and she said, too casually, she needed some time. Don't worry about her. She's always had a flair for the dramatic. I checked with the hospital. Nothing. Cops wouldn't file a missing person report, said she was an adult and had probably just left. But something about it felt off. She left her toothbrush, her coat, a stack of photos she'd kept since high school. No one just leaves that kind of thing behind. And not without saying goodbye to the one person who took her in. Then came the envelope. No return address. Just my name, written in shaky handwriting I didn't recognize. Inside was a single photo. Not a new one, an old one. It was me, maybe 6 years old, sitting on the porch. My hands were in my lap, my knees scabbed. But the weird part was the corner of the image. Someone had circled a shadow near the bottom step. It wasn't clear, a smudge, really. But the longer I stared at it, the more I realized it was a person. Standing just out of frame. Watching me. I flipped the photo over. On the back, in blocky red ink, were the words, "He never left." I felt sick. I remembered that day vaguely. I'd fallen running through the yard. Caleb had carried me to the porch and gone inside to get Mom. I'd sat there for what felt like forever, trying not to cry. But I couldn't remember anyone standing nearby. Couldn't remember being watched. I started rechecking everything. My notes. The clippings. My memories. I began to wonder if my mother's silence wasn't just survival, it was complicity. Maybe she hadn't ignored things because she was weak. Maybe she'd helped cover them up. Or benefited from them. The idea twisted my stomach. One night, I drove to the house around midnight. I parked down the block and walked. The porch light was off. No lights inside, but Dad's truck was in the driveway. I crouched beside the hedges, watching. Then I saw it, a flicker of movement in the basement window. Just a silhouette, slow, deliberate. I waited, watched. No one came out. I left. The next day, I bought a burner phone and called the man from the message on Danielle's phone. The one who'd said, "We had a deal." I didn't think he'd answer. But he did. His voice was low, gravelly. "You tell her I don't play games," he said before I even spoke. She knew what this was. "Who are you?" I asked. Silence. Then he hung up. I reported the number. Nothing came of it. That week, Mom invited me over for dinner. Just her and me. She said she wanted to talk. When I arrived, the house was spotless, too spotless. Table already set. My favorite meal, oddly enough. She was calm, almost robotic. She poured me wine. Then she said, "You've been asking questions. Stirring things up. That's not like you." I didn't deny it. She looked me in the eye, and for the first time in my life, I didn't see warmth or even anger. I saw fear. And something else. Calculation. "There are things you don't understand," she said. "Things you don't want to understand. You think there's a story here, but some stories don't want to be told." I said nothing. Just waited. Then she said the last thing I expected. He never wanted you. You were a mistake. But I loved you anyway. And just like that, she stood and walked to the sink, humming to herself. I left before the meal finished. That night, I had a dream. I was standing on our porch again. 6 years old. My knees were bleeding. But this time, I saw the man in the corner. Watching. Only now, I recognized him. Not from memory, but from somewhere deeper. Something ancient, feral, and behind me, the house was burning. I woke up sweating. Not from fear, at least, not the dream kind. I felt hunted. Not by someone with a weapon, but by truths that had been circling for years, truths that knew I was finally paying attention. The air in my apartment felt thicker, like it knew what I was about to do. I started recording everything. I mean everything. Voice memos, timestamps, photos, emails to myself. If something happened to me, I wanted it to be obvious that I hadn't just wandered off. I wasn't trying to be paranoid, I was just tired of being the only one pretending not to see the rot. The next lead came from a random, half-remembered name, Mr. Abbott, our neighbor when I was maybe 9. He had a shed full of tools, let us borrow his ladder once. He'd moved away after his wife died. I found an old envelope in one of Mom's kitchen drawers, addressed to a William Abbott, sent back as undeliverable. That was enough to start digging. Took me a week to find him. Or what was left of him. A nursing home in Nebraska. I didn't even know we had any ties to Nebraska. I called, lied about being a relative, said I was researching family history. They said he barely talked anymore but had lucid moments. I drove out. 12 hours. Something in me needed to look him in the eye. When I got there, he was sitting near a window, his eyes following the clouds like he knew they were trying to tell him something. I sat, waited, said my name. His head turned slowly. You're her son, he said after a long silence. I didn't ask who. I knew who. She used to scream at night, he said. The mother. Your mother. Didn't think we heard, but we did. I asked him why he moved. She asked me to burn something. Said it was trash. But it wasn't. I saw what it was. Photos. Papers. Records. I asked what kind of records. He looked me dead in the eye. Clinic records. For a boy who was never supposed to be born. That hit me like a brick to the chest. I didn't understand, not completely, but the pieces were starting to tilt. To lean into a shape I didn't like. What boy? I asked. He shook his head. They took care of it. That's what she said. But you were still there. I left that night without sleeping. Drove back with the headlights carving tunnels through the dark. The next week, I stopped by the house again. Mom wasn't there. Dad was. He answered the door like he'd been waiting. Didn't say anything, just moved aside so I could come in. The living room felt smaller than I remembered, like the walls were breathing in and out. You found something, he said, not a question. I nodded. I always thought she'd crack first, he muttered. But maybe it was always gonna be you. I asked what he meant. He sat down, rubbed his face. I didn't know everything, still don't, but I knew enough. Enough to be scared. She was different after she got pregnant. Paranoid, obsessed with watching the neighbors. Started keeping a notebook, dates, names, times people came and went. I asked once what she was writing. She said, they're watching me now. I need to watch back. I asked where the notebook was. He said he burned it. Said she made him promise. But that wasn't the worst part, he said. The worst part was what she did to Danielle. I held my breath. She used to take her out of school. Said it was special time. But she'd come back quiet. Always quiet. Wouldn't eat for a day. Sometimes two. I didn't ask. That's on me. I should have asked. My fingers were digging into the armrest. Why didn't you? His eyes filled with tears he didn't let fall. Because she said if I did, I'd lose you. And I couldn't. You were the only one who never looked at me like I was already dead. I left. I didn't slam the door. I didn't say goodbye. I just left. Danielle still hadn't shown up. It had been weeks. Then one day, out of nowhere, a letter came in the mail. No return address. Just a folded sheet of lined paper, torn at the edges. The handwriting was hers, shaky, rushed. It said, I remember now. I remember everything. You were right to leave. But don't come looking for me. You won't like what you find. And they won't let you leave twice. That was it. I didn't sleep for 3 nights after that. And then the incident happened. It was around 2:30 a.m. I was dozing on the couch, laptop open, when I heard a sound near my door. A slow, metallic click. Like someone trying to work the lock quietly. I stood up, heart in my throat, and grabbed the closest thing I could, a lamp. The door opened a fraction, then stopped. I yelled, loud. The crack disappeared. Footsteps retreated. I called the cops, but they found nothing. No prints. No camera footage. The landlord said the security system had been down for maintenance. That was the last straw. I moved the next day. Left the city. Changed numbers. Got a new job under a different name. My old life? I boxed it up and left it behind. But that doesn't mean it's over. I still get letters, short ones, always handwritten, no return address, always in the same red ink. Things like, "We never finished the story. He's still down there, you looked in the wrong room." I don't know who sends them. But I don't throw them away. I keep them in a box, just like the one under my bed all those years ago. And sometimes, late at night, I still dream of that porch. And the man in the shadows. I started keeping a notebook again. Same as before, dates, names, odd things I noticed. I told myself it was just habit, something to calm my nerves. But really, I was afraid if I didn't write things down, I'd lose track of what was real. The new town was quiet. No one knew me. I used a variation of my name at work. I told people I was from out of state, that I'd left for family reasons. They always nodded, never pressed. There was a stillness to the place that should have felt peaceful. It didn't. It felt like the calm between storms. 3 months after the break-in attempt, I got another letter. This one was different. It wasn't mailed. It was slid under my door. No envelope, just a folded piece of printer paper. One sentence written in tight, perfect cursive. "You forgot about the photograph in the dresser." That hit me like a cold slap. I'd moved in such a rush I hadn't taken much with me. A few clothes, my laptop, and a box of documents. The dresser it referred to, it had to be the one in my old room at my parents' house. I hadn't been back there since the last talk with my dad. I didn't want to go. I tried convincing myself it was bait, a sick game. But curiosity eats quietly until it rots you from the inside. I waited until a Sunday morning when I knew they'd be at church. Drove in under gray clouds, parked 2 blocks away, entered through the back. The key still worked. That told me more than I wanted to know. The house felt smaller, not just because I'd grown, but because the air itself was different. Thick, the kind of heavy you feel in your teeth. My room hadn't changed. Same peeling posters on the wall. Same chipped desk. The dresser still stood in the corner, crooked from the loose leg it had had for years. I opened the drawers. Empty. Then I checked under the lining of the top drawer. I remembered how, as a kid, I used to hide gum wrappers or coins in the gap between the wood and the fabric. My fingers found a ridge, a folded piece of photo paper, brittle at the edges. It was a picture of me. Again, but different. I was older in this one, maybe 15. I was asleep in my bed. Mouth open, face slack. The photo was taken from inside the room. From the foot of the bed. There was no flash, just enough light from the hallway to make the image visible. I stared at it for what felt like an hour. Then I turned it over. On the back, the same red ink. "You've always been watched." I dropped it, actually dropped it. My hands were shaking so badly I couldn't pick it back up right away. I left the house fast. Didn't lock the door, didn't even look back. Back in the apartment, I stared at that photo for hours. Who had taken it? How long had they been watching? And more importantly, why? That night, I started tracing connections again. Not just family, not just my house. I looked into the Kessler family, the ones who used to live next door. Their son Tommy had died in 2006. Drowning. His obituary didn't mention circumstances. Just the date and a poem about angels. I searched news archives. Nothing. Then I looked up the name in the message Danielle had received. The one I'd called months ago. I finally found something, a court record. Civil suit. Sealed settlement. No public details. But the defendant's name matched. The plaintiff's was listed as J. Doe, which is usually a sign of a minor or a protected identity. The year of the case? 1999. That was the year Danielle turned 12. Pieces began snapping together, not into a picture, but into a web. This wasn't just dysfunction. It wasn't just family drama. It was orchestration, carefully maintained silence, multiple people benefiting from everyone else keeping their heads down. I couldn't stop wondering, had my mother known what was happening to Danielle? Or had she orchestrated it? Was my father a coward or something worse? And who was sending me these letters? Because it wasn't my sister. Not with that handwriting, not with those words. I started noticing small things again. Moved objects. Sounds when I knew I was alone. One day, my front door was unlocked when I got home. I had installed a second deadbolt. No sign of forced entry. But one thing was different, my notebook was missing. I found it a week later. Placed neatly on the front seat of my locked car. Nothing inside was changed, no new notes, just mine. But the last page had something new. "Still think you're alone in this?" I bought cameras, changed the locks, rented a P.O. box. But none of it helped me sleep. And then one afternoon, while walking home from work, I saw him. The man from the photo. Older now, obviously, but the posture was unmistakable. He stood across the street, pretending to wait for a bus that never came. I stopped walking. He didn't look at me directly. But I knew. I turned and walked the long way home. I didn't call the police. I didn't even tell anyone. I just sat in the dark that night, holding that old photo in one hand and the key from my childhood house in the other, and wondered how far down this went. And if I was already too deep to get back out, I started thinking of time in terms of before the dresser photo and after. Because after that, everything was different. Not just in my head, but in the world around me. People started looking at me differently. The neighbors at the new place, the barista at the coffee shop I went to every morning. Even the girl at the laundromat who used to smile when I walked in, now she just glanced up and quickly looked away. Like I carried something now. Something you could smell. I started seeing the man more often. Never for long, never doing anything, just there, a shadow standing too still. A figure walking behind me but always gone when I turned. Sometimes I convinced myself I imagined it. But the worst part? I didn't care whether it was real or not. Because either I was losing my mind, or someone had made me doubt it on purpose. And neither option made me feel any safer. One night I woke up to the sound of breathing. Not mine. The room was pitch black. I held my own breath just to be sure. And there it was, slow, even, just a few feet away. I reached for the lamp on my nightstand and clicked it on. No one, but my closet door was open. I never leave my closet door open. The next morning, I checked the lock. Still deadbolted, windows latched, no signs of forced entry. I took my shirt off to shower and noticed a small scrape across my shoulder blade. Faint, but there. It hadn't been there the day before. After that, I stopped sleeping in the bedroom. I started building timelines, on my wall, with string and thumbtacks like some conspiracy cliché. I tracked the letters, the photos, the times Danielle went silent, the few cryptic things Dad had said. One date came up twice, March 3, 2004. Once in a calendar my mom kept in a junk drawer. Once in an article one found while digging into local school records, about a teacher at my old elementary school who resigned suddenly that week. No charges, no public explanation, just a quiet exit and a transfer to a different state. The teacher's name was Mrs. Eilers. She taught Danielle, and me. I drove to her last known address. Didn't tell anyone. She lived 3 states away, according to some alumni records. I waited outside her building for 3 hours until a woman with gray hair and sharp eyes stepped out to get her mail. I approached her slowly, gave my name, told her I had questions about my sister. At first she acted like she didn't know who I was talking about. But when I mentioned the date, March 3rd, her face changed. Like something cracked behind her eyes. She invited me inside. Her apartment was neat, sterile. She made tea but didn't drink hers. I was told to leave, she said. It wasn't a suggestion. By who? I asked. She didn't answer, just pulled out a manila envelope from a drawer and placed it on the table. I kept this because I didn't know who else to trust, she said. I never opened it. It was left in my school mailbox the day I left. Inside were photos, documents, copies of old medical forms, letters. One of the letters was addressed to my mother, from someone who signed only with the initials MG. It said, "This is your last warning. We made you disappear once. Don't think we won't do it again." I asked Eilers if she knew what that meant. She shook her head. I think your family was part of something. Something people paid to forget. What people? She looked me dead in the eyes. The kind who don't write their names down. I left with the envelope. It felt like holding a grenade. Inside one of the documents was a child's intake report from a now shut down clinic. Name, Danielle. Age, 8. Reason for referral, dissociation, unexplained silence, evidence of trauma. Parent signatures, blank. Guardian present, checkmarked no. I'd never seen this place listed in her school records. I checked it, officially, it had been shut down after a series of internal audits. But here's the part that made my chest go cold. The name of the clinician who signed off on her release. Margaret Green. Initials, MG. The next letter I got was different. It didn't come by mail or under the door. It was waiting inside my car, driver's seat. A small envelope, just like the others. No name. Inside was a single key. And a note. If you're serious about answers, go back to the shed. The shed. The one behind our old house. My father's don't ask space. I didn't hesitate. I drove that night, parked in the alley, jumped the fence. The shed was still there. Same rusted hinges. Same warped boards. The key fit. Inside, the air was thick with mildew and dust. Cobwebs clung to the corners. The back wall had a cabinet I'd never seen open. I tried it, locked. Then I noticed a loose floorboard near the corner. I pulled it up with my fingers, tore a nail out of my palm in the process. Beneath it, a second key. Smaller, older. The cabinet creaked open. Inside, files, tapes, a leather-bound ledger, names, dates, codes I didn't understand, and photographs. So many photographs. Children, adults. Some I recognized, others I didn't. Faces in waiting rooms, faces in hallways, faces caught mid-sentence, like they didn't know they were being watched. In the back was one last folder, marked in red ink. Final option, D. Inside was a photo of Danielle. And beneath it, a typed sheet that said simply, "Should this asset become non-compliant, apply phase 2. There were dates, check-ins, notes, Compliance declining. Behavioral shift observed. Contact. MG confirms unstable. And the final line. Termination scheduled. Approval pending. I dropped the file. I was shaking. This wasn't just abuse. This wasn't just dysfunction. It was systematic. And somehow, my family, my mother, had been involved in something far deeper than I ever imagined. I walked out of that shed and didn't look back. But the world felt different now. Smaller. Less real. Like I had stepped through a veil I wasn't meant to see past. And somewhere, I knew. Someone was watching. Still waiting. Still pulling strings. I didn't go home right away. I drove. Just drove. No destination, no music, barely aware of the road. I passed highway exits I didn't recognize, towns with names that didn't register. At one point I ended up parked behind an abandoned gas station, hands locked around the steering wheel like if I let go, everything would fall apart. The ledger from the shed sat on the passenger seat. I hadn't dared open it yet. Whatever was in there, it wasn't meant for me. But it had my family's fingerprints all over it. The red D label, the references to assets, the sign-offs, the initials, the shadowed photos. Something had been happening beneath our lives for years. Carefully maintained, erased in plain sight. I'd thought the abuse was personal, family dysfunction. But this was industrial. Coordinated. When I finally opened the ledger, it didn't start with Danielle. The first name was someone I didn't recognize, subject 01, Harris, Maylene. Then subject 02, 03. I stopped counting at 17. Each page followed a pattern: name, year of intake, status, behavior index, risk level, notes. But the chilling part was the column marked final action. It had codes, abbreviations. Some were marked RSL, some MC, and some simply X. I didn't want to know what those meant. But subject 12, Danielle. No last name, no birth date, just subject 12, Danielle. Behavior index, fluctuating. Risk level, elevated. Final action, on hold. Next to it, asset has established external contact. Reassess viability. And below that, scribbled in ink. Contact identified, my name. I dropped the book and nearly threw up. Somehow, at some point, I'd become part of it. A risk. A variable they hadn't counted on. I slept in my car that night in the parking lot of a 24-hour diner. I didn't order anything, just left the engine running and waited for the sun to rise, like light would make it all seem less real. It didn't. The next day, I scanned every page of that ledger, every photo, every document from the envelope Eilers gave me. I encrypted them, sent copies to a few hidden cloud accounts. I didn't know who to trust, but I knew I needed proof somewhere they couldn't reach. That night, someone knocked on my apartment door. Not a neighborly knock, not impatient, just a slow, deliberate knock. 3 taps, a pause, then 2 more. I froze, didn't move, didn't breathe. The peephole was blacked out. Covered. Whoever it was had done that first. Then I heard something slide under the door. Paper. When I finally checked, the hallway was empty. The paper was a photo of me, from that morning, standing by my car, scanning the documents at a gas station printer. On the back, written in sharp black ink, your insurance policy isn't as secure as you think. I moved again that night. I booked a motel 3 towns over. Paid in cash, kept my phone powered off. But they were right, I wasn't safe. Not even offline, not even hiding. This thing was bigger than me. Bigger than my family. I kept tracing connections. Danielle's school records, doctored. Her medical records, vanished from hospital archives. I checked with Caleb, half expecting his phone to be disconnected. But he answered, and he sounded tired. Not scared, tired. I asked him what he knew. Silence. Then he said, "You think this started with Danielle?" I asked him what he meant. "It didn't start with her. It started with you." I laughed. Not because it was funny. Because it felt like something cracked in my head. "What the hell are you talking about?" He sighed. "You were the first one they flagged. You just don't remember." I felt my knees go weak. When? I don't know. You were small. 4, maybe 5. Mom got approached by someone, said it was a developmental program. That they'd watch over you. I think she said yes before she even understood what it meant. But after that, things changed. The visits, the testing, the black car that came at night. I told him about the ledger, the shed, the notes, the photos. He didn't sound surprised. "They used us," he said. "All of us." I asked him if he'd ever tried to stop it. He laughed. "You can't stop something you can't even prove exists." Then the line went dead. I sat for a long time, trying to put it together. What program? What watching? And why me? I called Eilers again, but the number had been disconnected. I went back to her apartment 2 days later. The building manager said she'd moved. No forwarding address. Her unit? Already rented out. Furniture gone. No trace she'd ever lived there. That night, I got another letter. No envelope, just a folded paper under my motel door. "You were the trial run. She was the insurance. He was the cleanup." I didn't know who he was. But I had a feeling I'd be seeing him soon. I didn't sleep the night after that last letter. I didn't even try. I sat on the edge of the motel bed, staring at the words over and over again, like if I looked long enough, something would click. But it didn't. It just kept repeating in my head, looping like static in an old radio. You were the trial run. She was the insurance. He was the cleanup. I didn't know who had written it, or how they'd found me again. I'd been careful. I used burner phones, paid in cash, rotated motels. But somehow, they always stayed one move ahead. Like they were never really trying to catch me. Just watching, waiting. That's when I realized this whole thing wasn't just about Danielle. Or me. It was about control. About testing how far someone could be pushed before they broke. And I wasn't the first. I probably wouldn't be the last. But I'd come further than most. I went back to the shed one last time. I told myself I wouldn't, but I needed to know if there was anything I missed, anything that could explain what I'd become a part of. I waited until after dark, same as before. Broke in through the back, crept across the backyard like I had as a kid sneaking in past curfew. But this time, something was different. The lock on the shed had been replaced. Brand new. I froze. Whoever had come here after me, they weren't done. I should have turned around, left, but instead I found a loose board in the back wall and pushed it until it gave. I slipped inside, heart hammering like a drum in my throat. It was colder than I remembered. And empty, cleaned out, no cabinet, no photos, no ledger, just dust and sawdust and something scratched into the wooden beam near the center of the floor. I leaned in close, ran my fingers over it. It said, Phase 2 begins now. That's when I heard the footsteps. Not outside, behind me. I turned around, and there he was. Same man, the one from the porch photo. The one I'd seen by the bus stop, outside my apartment, in my dreams. Up close, his face looked normal. Average, too average, like it had been assembled from parts of other people. His eyes were calm, familiar, almost, but empty. He didn't speak, he just looked at me for a long time. Then held up something in his hand. It was a recorder, the same make and model I used to tape my voice notes. He clicked it, my voice played back to me. If something happens to me, check the basement. Don't trust the police. Don't trust. He stopped the tape. I couldn't breathe. He took one step forward. Then another. I backed toward the wall, but there was nowhere to go. And then, just as calmly as he'd appeared, he said, You don't remember the beginning. That's by design. I opened my mouth to speak, but nothing came out. You've been watched since before you could walk. Your mother signed the forms. Your father complied. Your sister was leverage. But you? He paused, tilted his head. You were data. I finally found my voice. What do you want from me? He smiled. Not cruelly. Not kindly. Just procedurally. We want you to understand. Before you forget again. And then he turned and walked out the back wall, slipping through the broken boards like he wasn't even real. I didn't follow. I just sat there for a long time. Eventually, I got up and left the shed behind me. For the last time. That was 3 years ago. I live a different life now. New name, new city, new everything. No social media, no phone. I pay in cash. I move every few months. I don't tell anyone who I used to be. But they still find me. Sometimes it's a face in a crowd that lingers too long. Sometimes it's a note in my coat pocket I know I didn't put there. Sometimes it's a whisper in a voice I recognize but can't place. I don't know what phase 2 is. Maybe it already started. Maybe it never ended. But here's the part that really haunts me. A few months back, I was walking past a park. Saw a woman pushing a stroller. She looked tired, pale, but familiar. It was Danielle. Her hair was shorter, her clothes worn, but it was her. I called her name and she froze. Turned, met my eyes. And then she did something that broke me. She smiled, not a happy smile, not relief, a warning. Then she shook her head, slowly, firmly, and walked away without saying a word. I wanted to follow, but something in me said no. 2 weeks later, I got a package. No return address. Inside was a single photograph. A baby, sleeping in a crib. And standing just out of frame, barely visible, was him. The man. Same eyes, same posture, same smile. On the back of the photo, written in red ink. The next trial begins soon. So if you're reading this, and you think it sounds crazy, good. It means you've never been noticed. You've never been flagged. You've never had your family rewritten from the inside out. But if anything I said feels familiar, really familiar, then I have one piece of advice. Start writing things down, because they don't always erase you by killing you. Sometimes they just make you forget who you were. And once you forget, they start again.